Every time I take one of these extended leaves of absence, it always feels like a little bit of a new era. But at least this time, I feel like there's a better reason for it. Welcome to the Cricket Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this episode, I'm going to be focusing mostly on a review of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, as well as a couple of other movies that I've checked out and enjoyed quite a bit since the last time I did an episode, and it's been a while. So first off, right off the bat, I just wanted to kind of clarify what's been going on lately on my end of things. So Kai and I just recently welcomed a baby girl, our first, named Zoe, a couple weeks ago. So, just as far as life stuff, we have been pretty busy just getting ready for her arrival. And, in the immediate care, we're now adjusting to life with a newborn. So please bear with me as, I try and find the place for this podcast in with the millions of other things I have going on, including now changing diapers and helping to take care of a newborn. So welcome Zoe to the Crooked Table family, and let's move on ahead with a couple movies I've been watching this week, or since our last episode at least. So I did see Doctor Strange. People that have been following the podcast for a while know that we are pretty big superhero fans, Marvel and DC alike, no favoritism here. But yeah, so Doctor Strange was, to me, the second half of Marvel Studios' basically strongest year to date. I feel like with Captain America Civil War and Doctor Strange, this is a 1-2 punch, the likes of which the Marvel Cinematic Universe hasn't really seen thus far. In that both films, to me, are in maybe the top 5 of the MCU efforts to date. There wasn't a whole lot of stuff in Doctor Strange that really stuck out to me as egregiously bad. The film had really stellar visuals going on. Benedict Cumberbatch's performance, as well as Tilda Swinton, Chiwetel Ejiofor, a lot of the main characters, those are all Oscar caliber actors, and I feel like they all pretty much lived up to what you would expect of them. I did feel like Rachel McAdams, as a recent Oscar nominee for Spotlight, especially, and a beloved actress in her own right, didn't really have much material to work with. She was essentially the stock girlfriend character, and the arc between her and her relationship with Doctor Strange didn't really come to a satisfying conclusion. I mean, if you're like me, you were probably expecting there to be a big climax where she realizes, oh, he's a changed man, or something to play out with that. And granted, that maybe would have been a little bit more predictable, but it still would have made her character's arc feel more complete. So I felt like she was lacking in that respect, as well as Mads Mikkelsen as Caecilius had, did the best that he could with the material he was given, but still has a lot of the same issues as past Marvel villains. I mean, Caecilius is essentially interchangeable with Malekith and, Ronan the Accuser and most of the other MCU villains, minus the likes of Loki, maybe even Zemo, a couple others. But yeah, aside from those two, the performances were really on point. The story was basically Inception meets the Marvel Universe. Did rely a little too heavily on sort of the Iron Man template, but essentially that it is also true to the comic books. So it's also, how much are they really supposed to veer away from the source material, because then you'd have fans complaining about a whole other issue. So basically you have to face critics sort of pointing out this sort of feels like a mystical Iron Man, or fans being like, that's not true to the source material. So of the two, I think they made the right choice, and I think for the most part it works. It's essentially, a very basic hero's journey on some level, but there's enough originality as far as the script, the visual style. I thought Scott Derrickson, who's done films like Sinister, brought a lot to the film. Really made it feel like his own, in sort of the way that James Gunn has done with Guardians of the Galaxy and the way Joss Whedon did with the Avengers. it does feel sort of right in his stylistic footprint. I think that's very apparent from that film, and it kind of keeps the movie from feeling very generic, so like the weakest of the MCU films really have thus far, and lends it a lot of personality. The script is got all kinds of twists and turns, a lot of adventure and comedy and romance. All of it's mixed together in a pretty satisfying way. Even if, yes, like most of the other MCU films, there's not that much. There's a certain level of artistry to it, but there's nothing that makes you. There's nothing that's profound or transcendent in this film, like there may have been with the Avengers in the last couple of Captain Americas. I feel like those three are still the best the MCU has to offer, but I feel like Doctor Strange, fittingly considering the comparisons I just made, is right up in there in the second tier level for me personally with the original Iron Man. So I have to give Doctor Strange 4 out of 5 stars. Very strong film. Not quite one of my favorite. Not quite my favorite comic book movie of the year. That still goes to Captain America: Civil War. But it's probably around the area for second place between that and Deadpool. But as usual, Marvel delivers, and I know the DC fanboys and the people on the DC side of things are going to try and keep that fire growing, being like, that Doctor Strange is, you just love it because it's another Marvel movie. I'm like, well, I love it, but I loved it because it's a good movie. And the DC side of things still has some work to do. Even though I didn't hate BVS or Suicide Squad, or I didn't have as much of an issue with either of those films as most people, you do see sort of a lack of clear vision or direction for the DCEU thus far. So I'm hoping to see that develop, with Wonder Woman maybe going forward, because MCU with Doctor Strange now, if he's lined up to be a new pillar of the Avengers going forward, they're looking like they're in pretty good shape. Just have to kind of land, hope that Black Panther and Captain Marvel sort of stick the landing, and then I think you might have your next generation next generation trio to take over for Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, as those actors sort of get phased out or replaced by other characters. Anyway, moving on, I also saw Moana, which I actually recently got the soundtrack to, so that should give you some indication. Disney animation has really been on point this year between Zootopia and this film. And it's weird that this episode I'm talking mostly about Disney stuff, but I mean, Disney's having a record-breaking year as far as worldwide box office, and considering the kind of quality work they're putting out there, it's hard to complain. I mean, I would want to normally criticize the fact that Disney is just a major corporation that's buying up all these other properties, Marvel, Pixar, Star Wars, and stockpiling that to themselves, and kind of having a little bit of a monopoly in the marketplace. Sorry, my mouth is dry. But when they're delivering such quality work across the board, it's kind of hard to complain. And Moana, which focuses on a young girl named Moana on an island in Polynesia, and her quest to find the demigod named Maui, played by Dwayne Johnson. Of course, this is the musical that was features music co-written by Lin-Manuel Miranda of Hamilton fame, and it's been getting a lot of press for that. I should also, it's important to clarify that he only co-wrote them. He did not do them himself, but had a couple other composers, Mark Mancina and I think one or two other ones where he worked with on the film. But the music in here, as you would expect, is stellar, and I've tweeted about this already, but I would be shocked if Moana does not walk away with the Best Original Song statuette, either for How Far We'll Go, which really feels like Colors of the Wind, or Part of Your World. It has the same kind of ring to it to a lot of the classic, or at least Disney Renaissance tunes from back in the day that were either Oscar winning or Oscar nominated, or You're Welcome, which to me felt a lot like Friend Like Me in that way, from Aladdin. I feel like the only ones that could really challenge it at this point are probably La La Land And, I think Sing Street, which some of you may know is my favorite film of the year, I feel like Sing Street has a solid chance to at least be nominated. I don't think it's going to win just because the film was so little seen. I think it made like $3 million at the box office or something. But Moana was a very delightful film and a lot of energy and humor brought to the screen. I think Dwayne Johnson brings a lot to it, even though it's just a vocal performance. He has that same charisma that you would expect from The Rock. His song is really strong. I thought he had a surprisingly strong singing voice. I'm sure we've heard him sing before in other films or maybe SNL or something like that, but I can't quite put my finger on where he would have sang before. But yeah, he was really solid in here. The story's really powerful and all about finding your destiny and breaking boundaries, and it's very very progressive in some ways. And for someone that just had a daughter, seeing films like Moana or Zootopia or Rogue One or Force Awakens or even the newest Ghostbusters, which I know a lot of people really hate, but seeing such prominent female-led roles where these women are just so strong of character really heartens me as someone who was about to raise a little girl. And Moana probably gave me more feels because we saw it just days before our daughter was born. But the film also has a certain care that it seems to take with the Polynesian culture. Something like Kubo and the Two Strings, which I've talked about on the podcast before, which I also really liked, sort of lacked that same kind of reverence. I mean, you had mostly white actors doing the voices of the characters in a very Japanese-infused, Japanese set story that was, heavily drawing on anime and that culture to convey its message, and didn't really commit to that. Granted, most of this is probably business related. It's just getting financing and the sad reality of filmmaking. But on Disney's end, they don't have an issue with resources really. They have billions of dollars at their disposal, so you can tell that they took a lot more care with trying to preserve that culture and the myths behind it that sort of fueled the storyline. Casting actors who were from different Polynesian nations, and just doing justice to their culture on screen. I mean, you always have a risk when a film takes on a specific culture that's not often seen in the mainstream media or mainstream entertainment, of kind of sacrificing too much of its integrity just for the sake of selling tickets or reining in an audience. And I feel like Moana really towed that line perfectly. The visuals, as usual, are amazing. Kai mentioned a few times when we were watching it or right after we were watching it, that the water and just the details in the backdrops and the animation just continues to evolve. It gets stronger and stronger with every film. You see a lot of that also in Finding Dory, which is another Pixar film, I should say. And Disney continues to be the leader in family entertainment, not only from a business standpoint, but from a storytelling standpoint. And there were a few years there, I'd say probably post Emperor's New Groove and pre Princess and the Frog / Tangled, where actually almost a decade. That's just about a decade, where Disney was sort of faltering. And I feel like, I still haven't seen the likes of Treasure Planet, Brother Bear, or Home on the Range, where their name brand and their the audience goodwill for Disney as a stamp of approval was sort of fading. And I think with the last few years of Wreck-It Ralph and Frozen and Big Hero 6, Zootopia, and now Moana, I feel like it has returned to, and I've said this before, I'm sure, on the podcast as well as in some of my other writings. This is confirmed to me this year that this is we're in the second Disney Renaissance. of course, the first Disney Renaissance being Little Mermaid through Tarzan. And I feel like Tangled and subsequent films since then have really confirmed that the Walt Disney Animation Studios brand is back in a big way. And these are films to not only see and enjoy, but to cherish. These are ones that you're going to want to own and rewatch with your family for years to come. Because I know that's what I'm going to do with Zoe and Kai. And so I highly recommend seeing Moana especially for all of you who appreciate Disney animation or animated films in general, but also especially for those of you that have young girls that you're raising. I feel like this is the kind of movie that they need to see, and in a time where, I'm not going to get too into politics or anything, but we're in a time where a lot of things are shifting, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the air right now in the political landscape and our world in general. I feel like these are the kinds of stories that young women should be watching, should be exposed to, and the kinds of characters that they should be looking up to growing up. Moana really serves that point of sort of being a fairy tale, but with maybe not as profound a message as Zootopia had as far as, social commentary, but has a real heart to it, and has something to say that younger audiences especially need to hear, even if it doesn't reach the same lengths as the commentary on prejudice that Zootopia had, that really needs to be heard by all, not just children. I feel like Moana is especially important for kids, but especially girls to be exposed to, because it really is something special. Even if I ultimately prefer Zootopia by a small margin, just because I feel like it is making a more significant point and making it more thoroughly and more surprising with its subtext. So that's Doctor Strange, highly recommended by me. Moana, highly recommended by me. Both of them probably 4 out of 5 or so. Moana, I'm still on the fence. Like, I could easily bump that up to 4.5. I would also say, since we're on the topic of family entertainment, even though this one is not Disney owned, unlike Moana, Doctor Strange, and Rogue One, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. I also saw Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, and I was not impressed with that at all. I feel like it's the weakest of all of the Harry Potter films thus far. I feel like the story is muddled and overly busy, and characters are not particularly endearing. The big twist at the end that we all knew, because the news stories already confirmed certain actors return for the sequel, and I will not get into that. But that was pretty predictable from an early point in the film. Did disservice not only to the film, to audiences' issues with that unnamed actor's recent scandals, but also did a huge disservice to the actor, to one of the other main actors in this film. And for those of you that have seen it, you know what I'm talking about. You know the actors I'm talking about, and the decision, the creative decision that I ultimately was not really that big a fan of. So it's surprising to me that J.K. Rowling actually wrote the screenplay to this. Well, it's surprising to me, and it's not surprising to me. It's surprising to me in that it's ironic that the first film based on her world that she actually wrote directly, and it's not based on a book, is the most inferior of all of them. But at the same time, she's not a screenwriter. She is a novelist, first and foremost. And she has a certain knack for world building and, threading a narrative that maybe doesn't translate to film. And I hate to say it, but maybe J.K. Rowling should have had a story by credit, and maybe had a screenwriter, perhaps, I think Steve Kloves is the name of the guy that wrote most of the other films. Maybe brought him back and had him write the screenplay based on her, treatment or just story idea, because this was pretty unsatisfying for the most part. There's long stretches of this film where I was sort of just wanting the movie to get to the point. There's long stretches of it where I was ready to leave the theater, but movies was like only halfway through, and I didn't really care much for. It was to me very mediocre, and considering the phenomenon that the Harry Potter world is, I feel like that franchise really deserved a whole lot better. And I know that Harry Potter fans right now are saying how great it is and how much they love Fantastic Beasts and where to find them. And somehow it got a strong critical reception, which I'm still trying to figure out, considering that I don't understand how that happened with Trolls either. But I do feel like history will look back on this as the Phantom Menace or the Hobbit trilogy of the Harry Potter franchise. I think there was really no reason for these films, well, at least this one, I can't judge the subsequent films. I feel like there's really no reason for these films to exist, other than Warner Brothers wanting to extend their, marquee franchise, since, they all they really have at this point is the DCEU, and that isn't exactly the slam dunk critically that they are hoping for. I think that this is just, studio mandated extension of, hey, we need to make 800 or however. I don't know if it made $1 billion yet, Fantastic Beasts. I have to check on that. But I'm sure it's at least going to make 700-800 million. And this is more about the studio execs lining their coffers than it is any kind of creative decision. And yes, granted, all of these are business decisions, but ultimately, there should be a compelling story and intriguing characters and something for audiences to latch onto, to propel the franchise forward. And for me, at least, I didn't feel like Fantastic Beasts really had what it takes. And maybe I will see the sequels, especially if I hear good things or if I like where it's going. I know that we're supposed to see some more familiar faces. I know we're supposed to get some Dumbledore and some other characters probably along with that in the upcoming films. And maybe that'll be enough, depending who they cast, depending on the trailer and all that stuff. Maybe that'll be enough to win me back to it and actually get me excited about it again. But as of this one, yeah, not thinking. I don't really think that the Harry Potter franchise is in a particularly strong place at the moment. So actually going from Harry Potter franchise to the Star Wars saga, that's a perfect transition from one fantasy series to another. And yes, I consider Star Wars more of a fantasy series than I do sci-fi, because come on, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, that doesn't scream fairy tale, right? Like, then I don't know what does. So with that being said, we're going to transition over to my review of Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Okay, so I just got out of seeing Rogue One, a Star Wars story. For those of you that have been living under a rock, or I guess who aren't fans of the franchise and maybe don't really care about what's going on with Star Wars, this is actually the first standalone, or as they used to be subtitled, anthology films in the Star Wars saga. Basically, this is a new initiative or a new approach that has been launched since Disney acquired Lucasfilm back in 2012. They announced the plan to alternate between the official episodes, Force Awakens being the first one of those, and anthologies or standalone adventures set in the Star Wars universe. This is the first one to be released of that, and then we have the Han Solo movie coming out in a couple of years, and so on and so forth. So this one tells the story behind the team of rebels that acquired the plans of the Death Star that enabled Luke Skywalker to destroy it in the original film. So lots of opportunity there to tie directly into the original classic, and they definitely take advantage of a lot of those threads and the chance to sort of retcon certain elements of the mythology. I'll remain spoiler free pretty much for this one, because the movie has just come out and everybody deserves a chance to see it. I'm not really planning on getting too in depth on it, But buzz, for the most part, has been really positive on this one. I've seen some people on social media actually saying that this was better than The Force Awakens, that this is essentially what they've always wanted in a Star Wars movie, that kind of thing. And while I did enjoy Rogue One quite a bit, and I think it has a lot of good things going on, brings a lot of freshness to the franchise that, you know, for like for a franchise that's now almost 40 years old, kind of needs, you know, a little bit of fresh blood at this point. So I think Rogue One does offer that. However, I did feel that as far as character, as far as story, as far as if I was viewing this film as on its own, it's not really nearly as engaging as The Force Awakens. For example, The Force Awakens, we had never met. Sure, you know, the film did follow Return of the Jedi, but we had never met Rey, we had never met Kylo Ren, we had never met Finn, Poe Dameron, BB-8. But those characters were all instantly engaging, instantly, you know, we were on their side and we were anxious to see more of them because they were fun to watch, because we wanted to know more about their backstory and how they connected and blah, 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 blah. I mean, look at anywhere on the internet and see the bazillion fan theories about Snoke, another new character, who was, you know, admittedly not one of the strongest new additions in Force Awakens. But look at all the theories about Rey's parentage and what's going on with that, and people speculating what's going to happen with her. She's going to train with Luke, and what, you know, there was already excitement about those characters. In this one, we have another female lead, which is very exciting for the Star Wars franchise. Which I don't know if you have ever seen. There's a YouTube video that basically cuts together all the footage of the females, other than Leia, in the original trilogy, and it's like 2 minutes. It's like Mon Mothma, and there's another character somewhere in there, but basically like a minute and a half of footage, other than Leia, of actual women in the original trilogy, and it's kind of messed up. So I appreciate the fact that Kathleen Kennedy, the head of Lucasfilm now, is making an effort to bring a lot of diversity to the franchise, a franchise that has been heavily dominated by, you know, white males. And here we have a female in the lead, and we have a ensemble supporting cast of all the different races and ethnic backgrounds, and that's all well and good, and I'm really happy to see that. However, the characters were not particularly well developed. There wasn't a whole lot about them to really get behind. I feel like each character basically had one like attribute, one main characteristic, and that was pretty much who they were. Donnie Yen was like a blind man who's blindly believing in the Force, and he has a mantra of "the Force is with me," and I don't even remember now. I'm one with the Force, and the Force is with me, I think. And that's kind of, we don't get a whole lot more background on his character. The same can be said for most of the other players as well. Mads Mikkelsen, who I mentioned earlier as part of Doctor Strange, his character is a little more interesting here, and he's actually part of some of the retconning regarding the Death Star to actually help explain a little bit more of the plot holes from A New Hope regarding the Death Star, its vulnerabilities, and the like schematics behind the Death Star, getting the Death Star plans in the hands of the Rebel Alliance. So this film addresses a lot of that and actually kind of cleans up some of George Lucas's mess from that original film, where, you know, we all loved the original Star Wars, but there's a lot of plot holes and things in there where you could be like, well, couldn't they really? Come on now. So Rogue One does a lot of good stuff with that. The visuals here, as you would imagine with today's technology, the visuals here, as far as the action scenes, are really strong. You've seen in the trailers the battles with the Imperial walkers, and there's of course X-wings and Y-wings and all the badass scenes you would expect. There's not nearly as much Vader as I was expecting / hoping for. However, there is a brief little bit towards the end that really makes me want to see sort of a standalone, I don't know if we can get a standalone Vader movie, but like maybe something that's set during the era of Star Wars Rebels, where we can get a little bit more of him sort of wiping out the galaxy, and him in a villainous supporting role, not even necessarily a lead villainous role, but just more of him sort of unhinged, like unleashed Vader. We get a little bit of that almost at the very end of the film, so that was really exciting to see. It was sort of like in the X-Men films, when we're now finally going to get Wolverine, Berserker Rage and all just going hog wild in Logan, and we got a little bit of it in X-Men Apocalypse. It sort of felt revelatory in that same way with Darth Vader in this film. There are also some surprising returns for characters from the original trilogy. Some of the technology that's used to bring them to life, and I won't get into details to remain spoiler free, because there's this, the footage I'm speaking of is not in the marketing for the film at all, and it'll be more fun for fans to experience it firsthand. That technology is a little sketchy at times. It sort of took me out of the experience a little bit when a couple of these characters show up augmented by CG. I will say that. I feel like the technology doesn't quite do the job that it was intended to do. I mean, for some of the scenes, some of the shots rather, it does work pretty well, but there are some also where the seams are pretty apparent, and I almost wonder if they could have taken a little bit of a different approach with at least the character that, and for those of you who have seen the film, you know what I'm talking about, for at least the character that shows up in the very last frame of the film. I feel like they could have done that a little better, or a little, just held back a little bit more, and it would have been more effective than where they actually went with it. But, for hardcore Star Wars fans, this is, of course, going to be another one that you're going to love. As I said, ties in perfectly with A New Hope. But basically, the next scene after, like, if this movie were to go on another 5 minutes, you'd be in A New Hope, essentially. So that's how closely it ties into the original film, and I don't think a lot of people were really expecting that. We were all sort of speculating that the story here was going to tie into the sequel trilogy at some point, and we were going to have references to Jyn Erso being Rey's mom, or learning something about Snoke going on in this film. Maybe Orson Krennic, played by Ben Mendelsohn, who, by the way, is a really strong villain in this film, and I think has a different kind of menace than we've seen in most of the at least recent Star Wars films. More of a bureaucratic menace in the way of Governor Tarkin, but not quite as cold. He reminded me a lot of Hans Landa, the Christoph Waltz character from Inglourious Bastards, and right out the gate, I mean, you still see in the first scene or so, the comparison is pretty apt, and that's the kind of vibe I got from him. Cold, but not more calculating than cold. Had a real, like, sort of simmering rage under the surface, and I thought that he brought a lot to that character. So it's a surprising move on Lucasfilm's part to approach this franchise the way that they're doing here. I love the idea of more standalone films. I think that that's only going to help the franchise grow going forward. I think Rogue One was a strong addition to the franchise, even though for me personally, Force Awakens is still a richer experience. There's a lot. I mean, it draws a lot on the history of the characters that are included, the supporting characters like Han Solo that are included in that film, and sort of instantly paints a portrait of this next generation of characters that we're anticipating to follow in subsequent films. Rogue One, as a one-off, was a lot of fun, but it feels more anecdotal. It feels more like a footnote to the franchise than than a substantive addition, if that makes any sense. The film ultimately adds some depth to some of A New Hope, but other than that, the characters that it brings to life don't really have much of a role to play other than in this film. So it's easily one that didn't really need to exist. Plus, for me personally, again, this is all personal preference. Those of you that grew up playing, the Rogue Squadron games and, really being involved or invested in the Rebel Alliance side of things, wanting to pilot an X-Wing and take down the Empire. I feel like I could take down the whole Empire by myself, that kind of thing. This should be a very exciting experience for you. However, for me, I've always been more drawn to the Force-sensitive side of the franchise. The Sith, the Jedi, that whole good versus evil dynamic. That's really what has always attracted me to Star Wars more. I mean, my favorite characters are Darth Vader, Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Luke. So, as much as Han Solo and Princess Leia and Lando Calrissian and Admiral Akbar and all those people, as much fun as it is to see the Rebel Alliance versus the Empire, or the First Order versus the Resistance, that dynamic, that to me has always been better served as sort of set dressing to the Jedi Sith dark side and light aspect of the franchise. So, not gonna lie, as a fan of that, I mean, I knew I wasn't gonna get a whole lot of it in this film, but I still would have enjoyed the film better had it focused more on that element of it, or included characters that we either already were invested in or did a better job illustrating why we should care about Jyn Erso and and her team here. So all in all, Star Wars, or a Rogue One, a Star Wars story, is a fine addition to the franchise. It's not as strong as the best of the series. I saw on Twitter Kevin Smith saying that it's Empire Strikes Back good. I think that's really pushing it. For me, this one probably sits behind Empire, New Hope, Force Awakens, Return of the Jedi, and it's above. It's probably as far as it's definitely better than the prequels. I'll say that. It's definitely better made than the prequels, but it's probably right around the line of right behind Return of the Jedi, I'd say. It's probably like basically mid range for the saga, but a steep drop in quality from The Force Awakens for me personally. That being said, I'm sure this film will actually be the favorite Star Wars film of a lot of people. I'm already seeing that it is. So, not knocking that, just a personal preference, I think, with this franchise. So, definitely excited to see more Star Wars films every year. I'm loving the fact that we're getting one every year. But I'm definitely going to be way more hyped for episodes 8 than I was for Rogue One, and it was an interesting experience. The fact that this film exists at all, which, as I said, it kind of didn't really need to. The fact that Lucasfilm and Disney took a creative risk on this and told this kind of story, I think shows a kind of gutsiness that some of the other Disney branches, such as Marvel Studios, hasn't really delved into too much. I feel like Marvel at least has mostly played it safe when it comes to narrative stakes and taking risks on certain things. I mean, the properties that they've gone after, like Guardians, things like that, have been on the riskier side of things. But as far as introducing a bunch of characters and then putting them into this kind of story, and again, I'm trying to remain spoiler free. It's a bold move for Lucasfilm, and as much as I preferred Force Awakens and the core episodes to Rogue One specifically, I'm totally fine with them taking these kinds of chances. I mean, if this kind of standalone film that might not be 100% my favorites entries in the franchise, if this is what keeps the franchise fresh, keeps it alive, keeps the universe growing, then I'm all for it. So for Rogue One, I'm probably going to go about 4 out of 5. So basically, with Doctor Strange, Moana, and this, we're like right on the 4 out of 5. For Moana, slightly higher range. And I definitely highly recommend all three. As I've said earlier on this episode, Disney has been rocking the shit all year between Finding Dory, Zootopia, Moana, Captain America: Civil War, Doctor Strange, Rogue One. Pretty much with the exception of Alice Through the Looking Glass, the studio has basically done no wrong this year. And it's as a fan of all those different properties, it's exciting for me to be able to stand behind them and be like, no, Star Wars has legit artistic credibility once again, thanks to J.J. Abrams last year, and I feel like Gareth Edwards here really keeps that tradition in line. So definitely, I know most of you are probably going to see Rogue One if you haven't already. So definitely drop me a line on Twitter at Crooked Table and let me know what you thought of it. You can also find Crooked Table on Facebook, on Instagram, on Snapchat. No, not Snapchat. I'm on Snapchat, but I don't think Crooked Table is necessarily on there. Just reach out to me and let me know what you thought of the film. What was your favorite moment in Rogue One? What kind of Star Wars anthology stories do you want to see told next? We have Han Solo in 2018, and then we have an unannounced one for 2020, and it could be Obi-Wan, it could be a spin-off of another character, it could be another story like Rogue One that just fills in the gaps in between films. So at this point, really anything's possible. So drop me a line at Crooked Table and let me know what you want to see. You can always find more podcasts, reviews, videos, and other movie-related goodies on crookedtable.com. I know I've been really lax on the video side of things for the last several months. As I said, that's what happens when you preparing for a new baby and trying to balance your workload with all this life stuff. Adulting is it's time-consuming sometimes, you guys. So I'm definitely planning on ramping up the videos in the new year. A lot of exciting films coming out next year that I can't wait to talk to you guys about. So definitely keep checking crookedtable.com for updates, or follow me on Twitter, and I'll be sure to communicate with you. And as far as this episode, I think that's pretty much all I have. It should be our last episode for the year, so I might as well wish you guys a happy 2017. It should be a big one for all of us, regardless of what happens politically. I know the whole post-election thing has divided everyone up, but at least we can always get together and unite over our love of film. And in times like these, having those commonalities, I think, is the most important thing. So let's stand united for at least our love of cinema, if nothing else, as we enter the new year and a new era for the nation and everything. So I've been Rob. This is the Crooked Table Podcast, and I'll check you guys out next time. Roll credits.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.